Hello, and welcome to the Making Soccer Safer portion of our weekend. I'm Janine Helland. I'm currently a coach with the 2006 girls PDP team. I am a former player as well, and I have some experience on the administrative side of the game too. I'm privileged today to be introducing Ciara McCormack. She's from Vancouver and is a former professional and international player. She played for the Republic of Ireland. She currently runs TOPP Soccer. It's an organization dedicated to helping high school players reach the university level. And she's also on the board for PFA Canada, which is the Canadian division of FIFPro, and that's the International Professional Players Union. She's heavily involved in the safe sport movement. So welcome, Ciara, and thank you so much for presenting to us today.
Thanks for having me. So everyone can see my screen, just making sure. Okay, so the presentation I'm going to do today, the title is Making Soccer Safer. So first of all, I'm just going to get right into it and just start talking about the current state of safe sport in Canadian sport. So this just is kind of a really good visual representation of the situation right now with abuse in sport in Canada. These are news clippings from the last 3 years. It's various national team level sports from across the country. So these are all different sports, all within the last 3 years. So again, just a good visual representation of what we're dealing with. So again, elite sports in Canada with recent abuse allegations. So these are, I'm probably missing some, but these are the ones that I was able to come up with. So skiing, soccer, track and field, taekwondo, ice hockey, water polo, synchronized swimming, rugby, gymnastics, rowing, bobsled, springboard diving. So the majority of coaches in there were charged. Otherwise, rugby is an example of a really recent sport that just came out with 37 players on their women's national team in the last couple of weeks, alleging abuse and harassment from one of their coaches. So this is an ongoing problem. So what I've come to sort of realize through my journey the last couple of years is there's a blueprint that it kind of transcends gender or sport or country. But this is kind of a blueprint, the 6 steps of sport abuse that I've come to find, again, through just my journey the last couple of years. So the first is the environment created for abuse. So it usually happens when there's a single pathway. The athletes have to go through one person or team. That's why national teams, I think, are particularly vulnerable because in most cases, athletes can't go anywhere else. Athletes are in a vulnerable position. They don't have very many resources. They're replaceable. Coaches, when they have the majority of the power, they make all the decisions in terms of decision-making over playing time, future opportunities. And they also usually have power over the other staff and administration opportunities as well. So it kind of just creates this sort of all powerful position, which creates the fear that allows this kind of thing to happen. There's a lack of education for athletes on what abuse is. So they question themselves until it's blatant. And I think there's I know for me in my journey, I learned a lot of things that I thought were just a consequence of my personality or just were normal, were actually abuse. So that's something, again, that it helps create the environment that allows abuse to happen. There's not usually a clear, concise process or a mechanism for a safe place to report bad behavior. So there's, again, no transparency, which makes accountability obviously difficult. And the coaches are employed almost always by the NSO, and I'll be using that word probably a lot, but National Sport Organization is just so you know the acronym I'm talking about. But the coaches are employees of the NSOs or the organization. So they'll usually have liability if their coach is found guilty of abuse. So again, it's just motivation for the employees to cover up and protect the organization. And I'm going to just refer to them as abuse allies in my presentation. And so, quite simply, the NSOs and the clubs have all the money and thus all the power compared to athletes. And that kind of just creates this environment that allows this kind of thing to happen. So step 2, abuse occurs. Step 3, there's an attempt to report. So just to give you an idea of mindset, the athlete is alone, traumatized. They've had something awful happen. They're singled out. They have no support. And often bystanders also are traumatized from witnessing the abuse. And that doesn't get talked about very much, but it's definitely a thing. And both the bystanders and the athletes are worried about losing athletic capital that they've accumulated that the coach or the organization usually has control over. So what often happens is the athlete will go to the organization thinking that they'll do the right thing and report it. But unfortunately, what I've come to really realize is the key piece of this is that the organization's goal is to protect itself first. So the athlete thinks that the organization is going to do the right thing. But as I mentioned, almost always the abuser is the employee of the organization. So there's motivation from the organization to suppress the abuse report. Again, like I mentioned, abuse allies within the organization also, they're part of the machinery that doesn't report because of, as I mentioned, potential and financial or even reputational damage to the organization or their own careers. Again, the people within the organization can hide behind the organization, whereas the athlete has to go at the person alone, which is, often traumatizing when you've been through something awful to now put yourself out there making accusations. The media normally would be another avenue that potentially transparency could happen from, but also too, as I come to realize, the media often has relationships with the NSOs and the organizations, and they have financial and relational capital that they don't want to disturb. And they also have legal concerns. So the media is a place maybe we think that there's going to be transparency, but there's, again, factors that I learned that are very important to why this stuff doesn't come out. But that's a reason why for sure. Step 4 is finally the abuse gets made public. So methods that I've come to see in terms of just a pattern is either a group of athletes come together and there's power in numbers. So I think the rugby women that came forward in the last couple of weeks, there was 37 of them. So obviously that gives strength in numbers and makes it less scary to come forward. Sometimes there's investigative media. So that's more of a thing in the US, but sometimes the media will come and uncover things. Police charges will also obviously get attention. And then social media is another avenue that I think has been getting used more and more over the last few years. Step 5 usually is damage control. So there's now, it's been blown open into the public. There's media attention, there's public questioning. There's often, there's a corporate statement that comes from the organization that's vague. We care about the athlete's well-being, blah, blah, blah. But there's no accountability or transparency mechanisms. The organization is always the top of the chain. There's no government or oversight. There's no competitive marketplace, like I mentioned, where people can go elsewhere. And unfortunately, the top of the chain organizations and the NSOs, they have the power and the money. And so they dictate the framework in terms of how the narrative is sort of played out. Usually we're doing an investigation. So again, there's either the organization will just say it in media and it'll be reported, oh, this group's doing an investigation, but there's no specifics. Or they'll hire a firm or an individual and they'll present it as neutral, but they're actually getting paid by the NSO or the organization. So obviously the results are going to be skewed in their favor. So the equivalent that I like to give it to, it's like Pepsi paying for an investigation or Coca-Cola, and then the results come out and it says that soda pop is great for your health, right? So obviously there's going to be some, motivation for that, finding, and obviously it's not going to be really taken as truthful because of that. And basically, again, when these investigations come out, like, it's further trauma to the athletes because either their experience is minimized or they're gaslit through these false investigative results, sort of, again, traumatized again to say that their, experience wasn't valid. And then there's, again, a focus on damage control instead of real change, because, again, as I mentioned, the priority is protecting the national sport organization or the club and not getting to the bottom of the truth. Then usually the public attention will fade. And then we get to step 6, which is that there's no real change. The conditions that enable abuse continue. And it's just a matter of time until the next story of abuse emerges. And that's literally been the pattern over and over and over again. And like I said, it transcends, the borders of countries, different sports, both genders. This is the pattern that I've seen over and over again. So I'm going to talk now about the story that I was involved with, as I think it's a great case study in these 6 steps. And so the title of my blog that I wrote was A Horrific Canadian Soccer Story. So that is just, again, what I chose as the title. So I'm just going to get into my background first, just to tell you a little bit about me. So I entitled it A Love Affair with Soccer. So 1979 to 2006. I probably should have been a little later than that. I only started playing when I was 7. So I'm sure I thought soccer was great when I was born, but I didn't start playing until I was 7. So I messed up a little bit on that. But so this is me, my first game when I was 7. Just again, a little bit of background. I grew up in Vancouver. I loved to play with my friends. My mom had MS, so it was like a sort of a safe, like healthy place for me to deal with my mom's diagnosis. I had only had my first tryout when I was 12. So really, I was super lucky, and I only have really positive memories of my childhood soccer. This was me as a teenager on the provincial team. So I was the last player picked for my area select team when I was 12. Barely made the first provincial team. It still, again, was sort of a healthy outlet for me with my mom's MS. I love to play with my friends. I had really amazing coaches through my different provincial teams and my club teams. I had a super positive experience. I kind of, learned to work hard and overcome adversity, and good things would happen. And my dream when I was a teenager was to play NCAA soccer in the US. So I was lucky enough to have that dream come true. I played NCAA Division I at Yale and the University of Connecticut. Again, I had a super healthy life balance with academics, sport, and social life. I loved to play with my friends. It was a super positive outlet for life issues. Again, amazing coaches that cared about me, and big dreams of playing professional and international soccer. So those are just photos of me. One celebrating with my teammates at Yale, and then another at the bottom was me kicking a ball against the wall by myself, which is what I usually spent a lot of my time doing at Yale. So again, lucky enough, it's just all, there was a lot of adversity in there. It sounds good throwing it up on a PowerPoint, but I had to struggle through a lot of stuff, but I was lucky enough, again, kept climbing the ladder. So in 2002, I was the 4th female Canadian to ever sign a pro contract. My first team was Fortuna Hjørring in Denmark, which I played for from 2004 to 2006. I had amazing teammates that were Danish and Australian World Cup players and Olympians. I was the first North American player to make the Champions League final with my teammate Stacy. I was the first North American player to score in the Women's Champions League. And overall, it was a great experience. And I think also too, I had, a very clear understanding of professionalism and just seeing European women's soccer at a high level at the time, and understood a healthy pathway. So I had teammates that came into my team in Denmark that were, in the 2nd division, came onto my team when they were 26, were the leading scorer, kind of came out of nowhere, and then they'd make the Danish national team. So I kind of, again, I think at that time, with there not being a lot of players going overseas, I think I probably had a little bit more of a worldly view of what was out there than most other players. And that kind of, again, probably played into what happened next. So unfortunately, the 6 steps of abuse began. So 2006 to 2019, again, a horrific Canadian soccer story. That's sort of where this chapter begins, 2006. So again, I'm going to just I think it's helpful to sort of, again, like I said, use the story as a case study and just kind of walk you guys through how it kind of all unfolded. So again, step 1 of abuse, the blueprint is the environment, and the second is abuse occurring. So I call it a toxic Canadian homecoming. So 2006 and 2007. So again, at this time, there was inappropriate and unusual one pathway to the Canadian women's national team. So the Whitecaps owner had, invested money into the Canadian women's national team. And so this allowed for a really, in my view at the time, and still an inappropriate relationship between a club with a national team pathway. So what ended up happening, the ramifications for players at the time, was that one coach, Bob Berarda, had 3 teams he was heavily involved with. So he was a Canadian women's assistant coach for the national team. He was the under-20 national team head coach, and he was the Whitecaps head coach. So that obviously gave him a really unhealthy amount of control and power. And he basically decided from the players that were sort of on the fringe who would progress to get to an opportunity with the Canadian women's national team, which is what everybody was gunning for. So I noticed he's from BC. So I had known him when I was a teenager, and I had sort of seen him, the more power that he got, the worse that his behavior became, the more power that he got. And obviously in 2007, he was extremely powerful with what he was deciding with players' future. By 2007, so I'd been home for about a year, it was just turned into a super toxic and abusive environment. So there was a player group with Whitecaps players, under 20 national team players, and there was Canadian women's national team players kind of around. And that was just, again, for the players that were at the under 20 and Whitecaps level, that was my experience. It was, in my opinion, there was a lot of things going on Players were coming to me oftentimes because I was sort of a player. Even then, I guess that was a bit more outspoken. But, players were being pressured to miss school. With the Whitecaps, we were being forced to go all over Vancouver doing clinics for free. The crux for me was a teammate of mine who was in a position as I was, that we had been invited from our performance with the Whitecaps on to train with the Canadian women's national team in the lead up to 2007. Bob had full control over sort of, again, if we were able to practice with them or not. And I was in the car when my teammate, stood up about something to Bob, and I witnessed her, basically getting berated by him and him screaming at her and her hysterically crying. We had to pull over the car. And at that point for me, it was where I was like, this is just out of control and I don't want to be around this anymore. So in 2007, I convinced myself and my teammate to go see the Whitecaps president at the time. We told him everything that was going on. We begged him for anonymity. And then he ended up telling Bob Berardi that we had come to tell him. So I had already decided that I'd had enough and I couldn't cope anymore. So I went to Ottawa, but my teammate stayed and she was benched that summer. So she'd been a starter on the team. But again, just giving you an idea of the power that Bob had over us. She basically went from being a starter, the national team players left. So it would have been a summer for her in normal circumstances to really shine, but she ended up not playing at all that summer. And then neither of us got asked to play for Canada or train with the Canadian team again. So again, step 3, attempt to report. So, as we moved into 2008, I began playing in Norway, but I still had friends that were on the under 20 team. I was hearing Bob's behavior was becoming increasingly inappropriate. The whole team was living in an apartment complex that was owned by the Whitecaps owner, Greg Kerfoot, and Bob had an apartment in there with all the under 20 players, and so basically full access to all the players. Now, once we hit May 2008, things started to really, again, I was hearing all these reports from my friends that were on the under 20 team. A player left camp because she got sexual text messages from Bob, reported it to the CSA. And then the next thing we hear is that he has sensitivity training. And so, again, what that meant, I never really got explained to the players, but he kept the apartment. There was no follow-up or monitoring, and his misconduct continued. And at that point too, a lot of players were leaving not a lot of players, but there were a couple of players that left the under 20 national team at that point, just because they couldn't cope with the sexual inappropriate environment that was going on. September 2008, there was retiring Canadian women national team players. They raised the alarm with the CSA. A mediator was hired. The police weren't called, despite there being sexual misconduct with minors. And we're all told Bob's fired and he's not going to coach again. And then 2008, 6 weeks before the under 20 World Cup, he suddenly departs the team. It's announced as a mutual parting of ways. And 4 months later, he's back coaching teenage girls for 10 years until my blog in 2019. So 2008 to 2019 I called it the dark decade. So 2011, I wrote a letter to the Whitecaps owner, saying I was disturbed that he was still coaching teenage girls and asking why they weren't doing anything when they knew they'd fired him for sexual misconduct. 2015, got together with former teammates to take action. 2016, there was group contact with the police. A new victim came forward. They told her that he wouldn't be coaching again. 2017, another victim and a player go to BC Soccer with a police report, meet with 2 executives. They don't do anything. We spoke to tons of media over 2011 to 2019. They were only interested if the victims were named. And we counted it up in the end. People tried to report over 29 times to different soccer organizations and media from 2007 to 2019. 2018, we watched as Bob was front and center as Coastal FC won the Canadian Soccer Association Under 17 National Championship, and he was the head coach for that team. And there was further harm for sure by watching this go on and trying to report to the appropriate channels and nobody listening. Step 4, abuse made public. So I had heard that, or I'd seen an article in the CBC talking about abuse in sport. And this is kind of the first time that I saw it being talked about, sorry. It was a changed world with, after Larry Nassar and Harvey Weinstein and Me Too. And I just felt, I had tried to write the blog before, but I never felt like I was in a mental place to be able to take the worst case scenario. I realized that being silenced was affecting my mental health and my life. Sorry. and I'd had enough. And sorry, I still find this really upsetting to talk about. And it's different times, it hits me. But basically I met a player the day I wrote the blog. And I just mentioned to her, it was really random running into this girl that I didn't know. She'd played soccer and sorry. Yeah. And so we were talking in the line. I asked her, I was like, it's really weird running into you. Yeah, like I just finished writing this blog about Bob. Did you ever have him as a coach? And she got teary and said, Ciara, I've been in therapy the last 2 years because of that guy. And we used to joke when I was younger that he either wanted to F you or destroy you. And so, yeah, so that was a sign for me to post the blog. Yeah, and I was terrified. So this is from the news the night I did it.
A Lower Mainland soccer club has suspended a coach following allegations of bullying and harassment. The incidents go back more than a decade, but the player speaking out calls it a systemic issue. Brianna Karsten-Smith reports.
Ciara McCormack has played professional soccer around the world, but she describes her time in Vancouver as toxic.
No elite athlete should have to have their physical or mental well-being compromised in any way, shape, or form.
This week, McCormack penned a blog post leveling serious allegations against several coaches, including the man who coached her on the Vancouver Whitecaps women's team in 2006. She says she witnessed bullying and that the coach would force players to miss school, benching them if they spoke out. McCormack says she also heard of inappropriate text messages to players as young as 17 and says her complaints and others were ignored.
I would love to know from somebody in the Whitecaps organization's mouth, why were the police not called in 2008?
The coach and team parted ways in 2008. McCormack says players were led to believe he wouldn't coach again, but he did until her blog.
So I'm going to skip through this because I feel like I'm running out of time. But so this is a radio interview. I think the trauma of silence is the title of this page. And I think, you know, I still get upset about everything that's happened. So I think it's I think you're seeing the trauma of silence, like right here in front of you. So I'll just skip through this part of it. But basically, to kind of continue with the story, in March and April 2019, more players went public. So obviously it was great for me to get backing. So, you know, the door was sort of opened and teammates came forward. So Andrea Neal, I'm sure people watching know who she is, the icon of Canadian soccer over, 20 years. And so she came forward and backed me up because she'd been one of the players instrumental in the first place. And then some of the claims that the under 20 national team players made, that he rubbed a player's thigh while in the car, called a player he had cut from the team starting lineup to his hotel room for a closed door one-on-one meeting and asked the player, what are you going to do about it? Sent sexually suggestive text messages to players, told a player during halftime talk how he thought her body looked in a wet white team jersey and added that he purposely decided the team would wear white shirts on a rainy day. So I think everybody needs to just keep in mind, this is the Canadian under 20 national team at the time, so this is what was going on and what players were having to deal with. So step 5 was damage control. So again, the organizations, went into heightened damage control, as I mentioned, as a step, but they don't really say anything. Yes, we're shocked by this, and as you can see here, the Whitecaps, BC Soccer, Coastal, they all were people that, again, people within those organizations were aware of at least some degree of what was going on. But of course, again, the corporate statements come out, nobody knew anything. I put nothing next to Canada Soccer because they still haven't really responded to any of this. So it was pretty much silence from Canada Soccer and continues to basically be silence. So again, without, I won't go into the presentation, I think, because I'm going way over as it is. But the heroes of the situation, in my opinion, were the Whitecaps fans. So they basically staged walkouts. So normally in these situations, the groups put out the corporate statements and then the story kind of dies. And then all of a sudden, these people we've never met before came to us and said, we're horrified by what's going on and we want to do something. So they basically, led thousands of people walking out of the Whitecaps games, and that blew the story up. Like, international media then was interested in the story. And that obviously made a massive difference to us in terms of now it was holding the organizations accountable. So again, there's a corporate apology then that comes out. It forced Jeff Mallett, the owner of the Whitecaps, to come forward, and he, I'll give just a little clip again of just how insincere these organizations are. But this was very rare because never would somebody like a Jeff Mallett have to put their face on the news. But the story had blown up to such a degree that he did. So that I'll just play a little clip of this.
Whitecaps is breaking the team's long silence about years of abuse allegations leveled against a former coach.
As CTV's Jason Perez reports, the move to quell the controversy comes as angry fans walk out of games and cancel memberships.
We're really sorry that this occurred. We don't like it. We're losing sleep too. Finally, the Whitecaps are speaking. And from the highest level, California-based owner Jeff Mallett flew in to address what has been a public relations nightmare for the MLS club.
I think we were missing doing the right thing. And the right thing, and this today, right? The right thing is to showcase the voices that are coming out here, welcome them in, open up our looking back at the issue at hand in 2008 and showing that what changes we've done. And if we need to make changes, we're all for it.
Okay, so you can decide. Sorry. Yeah. So, I mean, again, it was a win in a sense because you never see the type of person that's at that level of the chain have to speak about it. And you can obviously tell that he wasn't very comfortable doing so. There was an investigation done. And of course, like I said, it comes up that basically there was no cover up. So I will play this for you. But again, wasn't a surprising result, but it basically said that the Whitecaps didn't try to cover up anything.
Devoted fans who walked out on the Whitecaps, upset with the club's handling of abuse allegations, will have to decide whether to return to the game now that Sport Law and Strategy Group found the Whitecaps were not attempting to cover up the incidents or sweep them under the rug.
So again, not surprising, but that's obviously, you know, that puts it out into the public, like they didn't do anything wrong. And obviously I've sort of walked you through a lot of the situation and it's pretty obvious there was a lot done wrong. So an update, Bob was arrested December 10th, 2020 for crimes from 1988 to 2008. There was 4 victims, 6 counts of sexual exploitation, 2 counts of sexual assault, and 1 count of child luring. So again, it's just kind of, yeah, like that was who was coaching us. And that is who all of Canada soccer shut their mouth and let, you know, coach players for a decade after what happened to us. And yeah, so I think, but it was obviously for those of us that had been in this situation, it was redemption in terms of just the fact that this was a very serious situation that did get brushed under the rug. So that's, he's currently waiting on his court date. And so it's just, again, step 6, a matter of time until abuse cycle blueprint happens again. So there was a story in 2017, again, I don't have time to go into it, but there was another story of cover up and the whole thing in 2017. And there'll be more stories if things don't change. So again, just 2021 state of affairs with Canadian soccer and abuse, the safe sport side of things. So right now, the reporting, you go to the Canada Soccer Whistleblower Hotline. It's run by Sport Law and Strategy Group, who are legal counsel for Ontario Soccer, and they did the 2019 Whitecaps investigation. So they're obviously, you're literally calling an organization that is, their job is to legally protect Ontario Soccer, which in my opinion, especially after everything that's happened, is horrific. There's pathway problems. The Whitecaps are still involved in the Rex program. Investigating is done like with groups like Sport Law and Strategy Group, who have a massive conflict of interest and are involved with the NSOs. There's no support still for people coming forward. There's nothing done in an official capacity education for athletes. There's still all the different forms of harm not acknowledged. There's policy, there's lots of it, but it's useless if it's not enforceable, concise, and clear with follow through. And currently our safety standard in Canada is that coaches are only flagged when they're convicted of a crime, which is extremely hard to do. Otherwise, there's free access to vulnerable minors and athletes, and this continues on today. So in my opinion, 10 steps to make Canadian soccer safer. genuine desire, increasing diversity in positions of power. So having lots of different voices, a clearly defined safe environment, and an action plan if it's violated, to recognize different forms of abuse and educate athletes as to what they are. So empower the athletes. I think we need new laws where, there's consequences for people that don't report abuse to the police. There needs to be a safe place for athletes to report to the police, and also coaches as well. We did have a manager that tried to report with to the Whitecaps, Diane Voice. She also wasn't listened to. So there needs to be somebody outside of the NSOs. We need to support athletes and reporters of abuse. As you can tell, it's a traumatic thing to go through, and it's really important that we support athletes when they do come forward. I think we need to have tracking of abuse and misconduct similar to teacher registry, where we keep track of different forms of misconduct. There needs to be a third-party investigation that has no connection to the NSOs or the PSOs or the clubs that the people are employed by. And I think we need to eliminate this one pathway and having groups like the Whitecaps involved in any way, shape, or form with things like Rex. And I said, most importantly, we need athlete allies, people in power in the system, AKA leaders in clubs and organizations that truly care about putting athlete health and well-being first, instead of abuse allies, which are individuals within organizations that choose to cover up and support the status quo. We need people privileged in soccer to step up, support, and push for change. And so I just wanted to end with words from my blog from 2019 that I think are still true. So, Janine, do you want to read it? Because I don't feel like I can.
I'd be happy to read it for you, Ciara. So player development, methodology, and achievements mean nothing without players being given a safe environment to grow up and develop in. Athletes around the country pour their heart and souls into their sports every day, vulnerable to the power dynamics that coaches and organizations hold over them. They deserve so much better than the cheap lip service to their well-being that they are currently getting, and they deserve real actions and real laws. I pray someone with the power hears this and real wheels start turning to give the next generation something so much better, because what we experienced and where we are now is still so far from good enough.
And that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Ciara. I can only imagine, like, I start to get choked up reading that as well, because I can only imagine how difficult a time that you've had, and it's been decades of difficulty. We have some questions here because there's some individuals that agree with what you've had to go through. I know you alluded to it on one of your slides, that currently youth organizations only require a police security check for an adult to work with young athletes. Is this enough? And do you have any recommendations on how to improve this if it is not enough?
Yeah, I don't think it's enough. I think it's really hard to get charges, as I think our story shows, and then to even go from charges to a conviction. So like, that's right now the standard that's out there. So I think in terms of the things that I brought up, like, you need a safe place to report, you need to educate and empower athletes, you need to support them when things happen. And then there needs to be some kind of a registry that's tracking, different forms of misconduct, because quite frankly, like a criminal conviction, like that allows a lot of damage to be done on the road to a criminal conviction. So I think we need to have higher standards in terms of the kind of protections that athletes get within the system. And I don't think it's even close right now to, like, I honestly feel like it's throwing athletes into a forest fire.
So do you think that, just to continue on that a little bit, do you think that something could be done from, say, either a provincial level, since CSA is silent on the matter, of pushing the Alberta Soccer Association to try and get some sort of a registry like that, where it's been complaints, not necessarily criminal, where if clubs are hiring people, there's somewhere that they can go to get another referral or another background check on these players or potential coaches?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone acts like things are so hard to do, but it's like teachers, there's a teacher register, there's a doctor like registry, like, you know what I mean? There's an independent board that takes those complaints, and that, there's a tribunal and there's a conversation, and I just think, like, again, you know, teachers, you want to think about, like, you know, people think, oh, they have such access. Like, you know, again, it's the coaches have so much access. And if anything, they have an even bigger thing, because this is like, you know, the athlete's dream, their passion, you know, it's where it's a space that they're going to be existing within. So I think, yeah, like I absolutely think it's done in every, you know, so many other industries. I don't think it's that hard. I just don't think there's the desire to do it, whether it's the people in power that don't want to have the oversight, or like, you know, from a victim's level, when you know it's needed, like you're usually so emotionally fried from the situation that like, it's not a space you want to hang out and like play.
Right.
You know?
Right. Okay. So we have an action plan for one of your items. Another question that came in for you, Ciara. Thank you, first of all, for sharing your story. You shared an incredible personal experience. Where do you get your drive from to continue to tell this story? And what should clubs like Edmonton Scottish be doing to make sure what happened to you does not happen to another athlete?
I think I get my drive from the fact that, like, being in the space and seeing the damage that it did to my friends. And even, like I said, that player that I met in the checkout line the day that I wrote the blog, you know, I kind of was emotional and skipping through the story, but it was just a random player that I met in the lineup that had this coach. And so, I mean, from a, you know, again, like I said, like, I think my personal drive is that I see what my friends are still suffering through because of their soccer experience. And I think for me, you know, I was in a very bad place for that dark decade. And I think, like, I mean, with a lot of therapy in the last year, like COVID was a blessing for me in terms of just like a quiet time. Like, I feel like I've come out of the other side of all of it in a really strong position, even if emotionally, like I'm showing emotion, because I think before I was so good at detaching my emotion. Like, it's actually a healthy thing for me to be getting upset, because you saw in the video of how, like, I was very stoic, which again, it works in situations of trauma. It's not so good from a life perspective. Right. So I think for me, like, like I said, my drive comes from living it and just knowing the damage. And like I said, still seeing the damage around me from my friends. And I just feel like I am, you know, like I said, I'm privileged enough to have gotten through the situation, and I'm in a good mental health state now. And I just feel very committed to wanting to change this, just because, like I said, I've lived it and know it. And yeah, and just really have nieces and have friends with kids that I just don't want to have experienced this again. And I know that if I walk away at this point, it's just going to keep happening. So yeah, I think it's just knowing from personal experience what needs to change, and just almost, yeah, for like what I went through and my friends went through, like, I just don't want it to happen again.
Okay, well, along those lines, we have a question that has come in, and I think it's probably come in from one of my colleagues that I coach with. And they have said, I was telling the under 15 girls team that I coach about your session and said the topic was safe sport. And a player asked, what is safe sport? Does that mean preventing injuries? And they tried to explain, mentioning abuse and the inappropriate relationships. And it's an important topic to understand as you move to university and other teams. Ciara, how would you describe safe sport to U15 players? What do they need to know? And can you have a couple of examples of something that they could maybe recognize as something that probably isn't quite right, because they're starting to hit that age where, you know, they're in grade 10, 11, they're going to look for their, you know, their next steps, whether it's going away to school, such as you did, or pushing for national teams, provincial teams, that kind of thing. What is some advice that you can give to them?
You know, I think a huge thing that I don't think the messaging got to me, but I think it's really important to, like, get to the kids. It's like, and I'm sure you can relate as well. Like, you know, we grow up watching these like montages of like Olympic games and like all this, you know, all the flash and dash with like reaching the next level and whatever. And I think, but nobody, you know, no one kind of talks about the fact that, like, you know, these are great aspirations and whatever. But if I was talking to like a 15-year-old, I would say to them, like, your mental health and well-being is so much more important than like anything that you can accomplish, and your integrity in terms of standing up for your teammates around you is so much more important than like anything that you accomplish. And I think, like, getting that message to the kids that, like, you making, like, if the environment is toxic, like, it's not worth it. Like, I look back and I think, what, like, I should have gotten out of there so much sooner, but I just, again, I had it indoctrinated in me. Like, this is, you had to go through hard things to get to the next level. Like, all this kind of stuff. And I literally kept myself in a very like mentally awful situation for a really long time because of those messages. So I think that again, getting that to the players, that those things matter more than accomplishing thing in sport. It is the first important thing. And then I think from a practical level, like, I think we need to talk about grooming more, like that's something again, like it's just so insidious and it's around and it happens. And, one of my friends, Eden, who was on the under 20 team, she had been on the 2006 under 20 national, she went to the World Cup as an underage player. And then, 2008, she should have been like a star. She'd been an underage player at the World Cup before. And she said, she's like, I didn't have the words for it, but I saw grooming going on around me and I knew it felt gross. It made me feel awful. And so she ended up quitting the team before the U20 World Cup because she couldn't be around it anymore. And she didn't have the language or the knowledge or any of that. So I think again, while the jury's still out, if athletes are being protected once abuse happens, it's I think we need to arm the 15-year-olds at that age with the information. What is grooming? What are things, so that they're not walking into situations having gross feelings, but not understanding what they are, and I think again, and also just giving the under 15 players a safe place. If there's something that's going on, I had a situation where I got into it with a radio host at one point, when the blog hit, and he said, Ciara, let's be honest, if this actually happened, the people are going to ask if this actually happened, why the girls didn't go to their parents. And I'm like, do you have any idea how it works with sexual harassment and sexual assault of teenage girls? Do you think they're going to go to their parents? So if anyone out there thinks that, that's not how it works, So I think again, just for the players and coaches, or if there's trusted people, just if someone does report something to them, giving them and empowering them what to do with that knowledge, and giving them again, a very concise plan. And I said that the week the blog hit, that my goal coming out of this is that a 15-year-old, whether they're in Abbotsford or Edmonton or Nova Scotia or whatever, something happens and they know exactly how they should be treated. They know exactly if something happens, where they go, and they're safely taken care of if something does get reported, and so I think again, we just need to empower the athletes with information.
Excellent. Sort of a little bit of an aside from that, you do have your company. I believe it's a company called TOPP Soccer. Mm-hmm. And we touched on this a little bit last night. This actually question is coming straight from me. So you did touch on we touched last night on university soccer, with athletes going to the States such as you did, or trying to stay in Canada. And I was just curious as to whether your TOPP Soccer focuses on getting the athlete to university, or getting the athlete to university in the States, or exactly what these 15, 16-year-olds that are on these PDP, these sort of elite teams that are looking for that, what is out there for them in terms of trying to get into the university pathway?
So what we do, it's aimed US and Canada. So tons of great programs across Canada, and obviously there's options in the US as well. So to be honest, in retrospect, I've looked back in sort of my quote unquote career pathway, and even with TOPP Soccer, I think it was a therapeutic outlet for me to deal with what we went through, because I think my idea is the more options that athletes have to get to the next level, the more power that the athlete has. And so, and again, the idea that a big piece of what we do is educating the athletes as to how to go about things. Cause again, I'm really big on education equals empowerment. So, so those are, that's again, what the organization, sort of what we do. So we run events across Canada, obviously not during COVID. It's kind of put a little quiet damper on things, but that's what we do. And again, I've gotten to know coaches across Canada, and there's so many tremendous programs and people. And that's again, the biggest thing that I would say to, athletes looking to go to the next level, talk to players on different teams and find out again, because everything's glossy on the outside, but go and ask a bench player on a university team, what's their experience with the coach. And that to me usually is a really solid gauge in team environments, just because, that's a player, if they're engaged and involved and treated properly, chances are you're going to have a good experience at that program, no matter how you end up coming in as a player. So so like I said, I think it's just about doing research and talking to people. And like I said, obviously with university, getting an academic program that fits what you're looking for. But I think, something like soccer, you're spending a lot of time around different coaches. So I think really getting a sense of the kind of people and the culture that they have at their program is a really important way to, again, like I said, like it's about putting yourself into the best possible, like, well-being and mental health situation. So.
Exactly. Okay. Thanks for that information. I think we're just about at the end of our time here. So I personally want to thank you for your presentation and all the information that you gave us and your bravery for giving us that. And then we'll probably just wrap it up. The last one that came in wasn't really a question. It was more of a comment. And I think probably, see, you got me all emotional now, Ciara. I think probably
it's like I passed the torch. I'm like back.
Yes, but actually, people who know me know that it's not really hard to get me like this. So you've done a great job. But basically, what they wanted to finish with was, I just wanted to let Ciara know that this has inspired me to be diligent and be willing to call out inappropriate behavior when I see it. Thank you.
Aw, thanks.
See, we can share the emotion here, Ciara.
I know. I'm like, it's a good thing we're signing off. I think.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, thank you so much for the time that you committed to the Scottish Club today. And hopefully we can take a lot of your information forward and move on with it. Thank you.
Thanks so much for hosting.
Thanks.